like I said, like a professional team as professional wrestling was.
Oh no, you're right, because again, the Mid Atlantic fans were hardcore. I mean, they were okay with the Georgia guys or the Florida guys or whoever, but what you learned in magazines back then, that was really all. I mean, the
Mhm.
people in some of the areas, like I said, that could occasionally pick up a fuzzy, picture off of an antenna of Gordon, announcing Georgia, or maybe you would see, because every now and then, like on Crockett's TV, they would show a clip from somebody coming from another territory. You
Sure.
might get to see a little clip, but really the magazines, the old Inside Wrestlings and different, the old Wrestling Worlds, all the old magazines were the only way that you really knew about what was going on in other places. And so you're right. You were an NWA guy. We didn't like WWF. I mean, who the heck wanted to see that? That wasn't
No.
real. I mean, they had, Bruno. We had Hardy Race. I mean, that was,
Sure.
and so you're right. There was a loyal fan base to the brand, but then the brackets down into the territories, because
Yeah.
that was my place.
And to the wrestlers
Absolutely.
themselves. So we used to watch wrestling from Madison Square Garden, and we wasn't very impressed.
No, it just didn't seem, for
No.
whatever reason, it didn't seem the same. The ring was different. I loved, man, and I know you've seen this and heard this, the clap of that PVC pipe against that steel cable. And the
Yes.
first time I saw a WWF show with rope, I'm like, what is that? You got to hear that. You got to hear that body slap that cabin. That PVC pipe.
Something that is completely missing, and I know you remember it, is when that big comeback started, and that would draw back, and they would lay that first one in, and when they let that place would go boom, it was like whoosh. We called them
Oh
the
yeah.
whooshes,
Oh yeah.
and with
Absolutely.
every one of those,
It would
and
count. Oh
I mean, they would be right with that boom, whoosh,
yeah.
whoosh with every one, and that's missing, completely missing
Oh yeah.
from
Yeah.
from the matches
Again,
today.
I think you said it right a while ago. Unfortunately, and again, it's not trying to knock anybody doing the craft. I don't do that. But the interaction of allowing the fans, in essence, to dictate the course of that match. Because again, you're right. They would pop for that corner deal or a
Mhm.
monkey flip or
Yes.
whatever
Mhm.
that crowd would be like. Oh man, my guy's got a chance now.
Yes.
Or what it was. But then at the same time, equally, when that claw hold got put on, or that
Yes.
cobra clutch, where
Yes.
the air stopped out of the room, because especially if it's on your guy, he's over. There's no way he's going to win now, and so the heel's going over. Or if Wahoo just nailed the chop.
That's
So
right.
you can't wait for that 1, 2, 3. And again, whether it was Tommy Young or whether it was your dad or Sonny Fargo or Stu Swartz or any of them, that was our guys. The
Yes.
referees. Man, I mean, they and again, they don't get near as much credit either. Man, I mean, those guys were, they were phenomenal. They just
Yes.
added so much to the show and to the match.
And a lot of times when you saw things change, the referee's one that told them to change. They said, "This isn't
Absolutely.
working. This isn't working. Go do something else."
Oh yeah. I've gotten to be
That's okay.
very good friends with Tommy Young over the years, and I mean, to hear him tell some of the stories, and of course working all the matches, the big matches with Rick and all the different ones over the years. I mean, it's just phenomenal. I mean,
Awesome.
it's just unreal.
All right, so now we come to this part right here. Let's talk about how this all came to be.
Oh
Came
yeah.
to be. So tell us how that started.
Well, it was a dream, man. I had dabbled in wrestling over the years, just a little bit. I had back in the late '80s. I met Nelson Royal and Gene Anderson, and had kind of gotten involved a little bit, and did some training and different stuff. I had just bumped a little bit, had a few matches, but I was a police officer. I couldn't dedicate a tremendous amount of time to it because I couldn't afford to be hurt. you know. And but I tell you though, the and I'll tell anybody this. That was the hardest physical thing I have ever gone through in my entire life was being in there with those guys. I mean, I had so much. I wanted to do it when I was a kid growing up because it was just a dream, Actually, having gotten in there, I mean, I learned just how hard it really was, regardless of how much of it was a show. the punishment your body took in that ring was just unbelievable. So I had great respect for it. And I, of course, having loved growing up where I did and being able to go to all the shows and get to know the guys, I had reached out to Mike Mooneyham and said, what would it look like? What would it be like to bring these guys back for one night? And he was like, oh, I don't know. It's never been done around here. We had heard of a few reunion type things that had happened up north, but we had never seen anything like that around us at all, ever. And so I said, well, if I can find the funding to do it, I said, would you help me reach out and let's just see if anybody would even be interested? That was the initial thing. And so we reached out to Rip and Swede. That was our first two guys. And, like I've shared with you before, they had not seen each other in 25 years. The idea of them being able to get back together, they just jumped at the opportunity. At that time, Rip was living in Texas. He was back at home in Texas. Swede was in Charlotte. And so Swede was able to drive down, was no problem. Rip, I made arrangements to fly him in. Funny story about that. I got the tickets lined up, and I had someone else booking the tickets for me. And so I'd given them the names, and they had the character names, but they didn't have the real names. And I said, you have to call me before you book the tickets, because that's not who these people really are. IDs and tickets have to match, So they booked the ticket for Rip Hawk and his wife, Kitty Hawk. And so I'm having to call the airport. I'm having to call the airport and say, no, that's Harvey Evers. that's not really real. But so that was quite the dilemma. But anyhow, we started. So that started the ball rolling, and so Rip and Swede said yes. And then Abe Jacobs said yes, and Wahoo initially said yes. He got sick, and then George Harris was in Virginia, and Sandy Scott, and it just kept snowballing until I'm like, oh man, look at this lineup. It was unbelievable. And then Penny Banner came. But only with the caveat that Johnny wouldn't be there. So that's a whole nother story. But but Johnny was working for the sheriff's department at that time, so he couldn't get off anyhow. So it actually worked out. Wendy, their daughter, and Penny came down. But Moolah and May and Thunderbolt, everybody jumped in. Tully Blanchard came, George South, all the guys came. And so we put it all together, and so what we did, we made an agreement. We said, okay, listen, I want to be fair. I'm not asking anybody to do anything that you don't want to do, number one. And I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm not asking you to perform. I'm not asking you to do anything. If you want to come and sell gimmicks, you want to do pictures, because again, this was new to everybody. None of us had ever done any of these things. I mean, they had obviously had opportunities to sign autographs and do things at shows and stuff, but never anything like this before. So what the deal was we paid all their transportation to get in. We flew them in. We put them in a nice hotel. We had a nice banquet and a food and everything. It didn't cost them one penny to get there, unless they drove. They took care of their own gas or whatever. But nobody asked me for a penny. Now, of course, that's unheard of. Everybody today is, what's the payoff? But we didn't have one. And so we got it. We set the date. It was in May of '98. And now the only thing that hurt us, I guess, was we didn't realize it at the time we set the date. We were in competition with an annual event in Charleston called the Spoleto Festival, which is like arts and frou-frou stuff or whatever. So we're like, well, the hardcore wrestling fans that remember the Mid-Atlantic, NWA, where they'll come, and they did. We had a great crowd. I mean, I can't, I would never sit here and tell the old wrestling stories. They sold out, hanging from the rafters. It wasn't that, but the people that wanted to be there came, and man, I tell you, it was so much fun watching these guys interact with the fans, because they'd never gotten to do that. Because again, we're talking about when Ole was a heel, they didn't talk to the fans. No. When Johnny Valentine, he didn't talk to the fans. So this was the first time for a lot of people that they ever got to handshake, one of these guys, or tell them, man, I remember, back in '65. It was just a real intimate, close interaction, and so it was so much fun for them. And then to watch them get back together. seeing Thunderbolt and Tim Woods talking for the first time in years, or Ripon Sweet, or whoever. It was just great. And so we did the banquet. That was a private thing. Nobody could come to that. And then we had the show, and of course the autograph things and stuff. And then we had a wrestling show. And how we orchestrated that. Again, initially we weren't really sure how we were going to work that out. We weren't planning on using any names too much, because we really wanted the focus to be on the legends. And so I remember, now of course they're both dead and gone, but I got a phone call one day, and the voice sounded a little bit familiar, but I said, I couldn't quite place it. It was Buddy Landell. And Buddy was asking to come be on the show. And and I'm like, well, Buddy, and I told him the deal, and he's like, well, I'd have to have, and he gave me a figure, and I'm like, well, Buddy, there's no money in this show. I said, that's not how this one works. I said, I'd love to have you come on down, but and so Buddy said, well, I'm gonna give a call to a friend of mine, maybe you've heard of him, and we're gonna come work a match for you. He called Terry Gordy. And they were going to work this main event match. So I had all the posters made up, stuff like that. Well, of course, it ended up falling through. Terry didn't come, and Buddy wouldn't come because there was no money. But whatever, I didn't care.
Sure.
We had the legends of legends in my eyes as a Mid-Atlantic guy. The only people missing for me at that moment was Wahoo and Rick. And Rick had done all the promos for us on the radio and everything, and he was on the way down, and they called him, and he had to go back to Charlotte because his dad was near death, and I understood that. But of course, a lot of people were hoping to see him there. But Wahoo had gotten sick on the dialysis thing, but everybody was there, so we did the shows. And what was so unique about that is we put the matches together. A lot of the guys in the back were helping me book them and put them together, and we matched up everybody and stuff. So everything was very old school, that it was booked on the fly. I mean, it was, if we're going to do this, do that, whatever. But what made it unique, though, was who ended up getting involved. And it was your dad and Tommy Young and Brian Hildebrand and Charles Robinson. And they came and they refereed. I mean, the referees of referees, as far as I was concerned. I mean, the only ones missing were Stu Swartz and Sonny Fargo. But they were there, and it was just amazing. They put on that striped shirt and they stepped back 30 years, man, and they just had such a great time. Your dad refereed Susan Green and Leilani Kai in a match. And then Charles refereed two guys out of Charlotte. Brian refereed George South and a local guy that was a worker there. And then Tommy Young refereed my match. And again, we worked the gimmick where, I got in Tommy's face and he pushed me down. And I'm thinking there, man, here's this kid that his very first match was in this building, 20, 30 years before that. And here I am. I have no business in here, but I'm in the main event of this show with Tommy Young as the referee. How could it ever get any better than that? To me, that was like winning the world title at WrestleMania. Right. That was like, you just couldn't have gotten any better than that. And strangely enough, that would have been the last show ever held in that building, wrestling show. And so my fandom as a kid started in that building, and it ended in that same building as a fan and as a worker with Tommy Young as a referee. Again, you couldn't have come more full circle if you scripted it. It was just phenomenal. But it just took on a life of its own because people heard about it, even the ones that weren't there. And I was getting calls and different, you're going to do it again. And we planned on trying to do it again. But, man, I tell you, financially and just – some of the guys started getting sick, and several of them died because, right there in succession, it wasn't long. Tim Woods died, George Harris died, Wahoo died, and it just kept, and it was like, it just won't work,
That was meant to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it really was. It was a one-time deal, once-in-a-lifetime deal, and then once it was done, it was done. But the guys, they had a phenomenal time, and it set the stage for other ones. And again, I don't take any credit about anything. But later, when Greg Price and different ones would do stuff in Charlotte and different ones, it all started right there. And I would tell them that to their face. I'm not bragging, but they got the idea because a lot of them were there. And they got the idea from what Mike and I did. And I couldn't have done it without Mike. I'll give him all the credit in the world. I mean, he was my contact. But what was so awesome about this, though, Rodney, was from being a fan, being a kid that grew up in loving wrestling, to now be able to hang out with these guys that were my heroes as a kid, and then formulate friendships with them to where, I did a few more shows in other places later, and have, Ronnie Garvin come in and work, the main event against Stan Lane, or have Bill Eadie come in and work somebody, or do this. And then, of course, you and I talked about it before. I got to be very, very close personal friends with Burrhead Jones. And,
Yes.
and Burrhead, I got to show you something here. I have Burrhead's boots. He gave them to me. I have the only pair of wrestling boots. Burrhead, I have them. They're mine. They will never be on.
I've seen those red ones.
They will never be on eBay. These are mine. This was Super Burrhead from the commercials, and this is Burrhead Jones' real boots. It was funny. It was funny. Have you seen this new show, the Wrestling Treasures, WWE Wrestling Treasures gimmick that they're doing on A&E?
I have missed that.
Okay, well, it's a new show where they're traveling around and they're talking to old time fans or people that might have memorabilia from unique places. Well, I got a phone call because somebody heard I had this, and so I got a phone call from this guy one day, and they said, "Do you have any? We understand you might have some unique wrestling memorabilia." I said, "I do, but you'll never put it on TV." And they said, "Why?" I said, "Because the wrestler that had this was called Burrhead Jones." And they were like, "Oh yeah, we couldn't use that." And I'm like, "Well, that was him. That was his character. That was his name." And he was the most wonderful, wonderful guy. I loved Burrhead. And again, and I don't say, and anybody listening to this, please don't think we're not speaking ill or calling this man a name or being disrespectful in any way. Until his last breath, if you called him, he would say, "Andy, this is the Burrhead." I mean, that was him.
That's exactly right. Right.
I talked to Burrhead a couple of days, maybe a week or two before he passed away, and he was in some type of nursing facility. He was very sick. He had lost his sight, and he was immobile. He couldn't get around. It was very, very sad, but even in those situations, he was still Burrhead Jones. It was the most wonderful thing in the world because I had him on the phone, and he was obviously in a wheelchair being pushed by like an orderly or something. And so he would say my name in such a funny way, but he would say, Andy, hold on a minute. He said, "This daggum fool's done park me by the jukebox. I can't hear him." He was just such a wonderful man. He lived on my patrol route when I was a deputy sheriff, and he and I got to be friends. And Burrhead was instrumental in this show. And one of the great things is he went around all day long when we were getting set up with a microphone, and he was interviewing Ole and Sandy Scott and T-Bolt and getting them two together. Oh man, it was like magic, man. It was awesome.
So he had the microphone.
He had the microphone.
And he would, and in the book, there's pictures of this.
Oh yeah.
In this book, there's pictures of all of this. There's Johnny Valentine's, there's Burrhead, there's Ole, there's Tully Blanchard. I think he gives a inspirational speech. I think.
Absolutely. Yep.
And then tell us how Burrhead and Johnny Valentine, how did they get along?
So Johnny's standing outside the ring, of course, because Johnny's on braces. He can't walk on his own without some help. And so he asked it was myself and George South, and I want to thank Charles Robinson. A couple other guys were standing there. He said, "Hey guys, could you help me get in the ring? I'd really like to get in the ring," because we had a beautiful ring set up. And so we helped him. We picked him up. We set him on the apron. We got him in. He rolled in, and he got over in the corner, and he took his braces off, and he's just leaning against the turnbuckles. Well, Burrhead is running around and just juking and jiving and just being Burrhead, And so he goes up and says, "Hey, champ. And he was like, "Yeah." Johnny in his very low, stoic voice is like, "Yeah, what do you want, Burrhead?" And Burrhead said, "You think you still got it?" He said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You still got that? You still got this hammer?" He said, "Come here and I'll show you." And Burhead came over, and Johnny pulled him back across that rope and said, "Boo!" You could hear the breath come out of Burhead's body. And so the picture in the book of Burhead in the fetal position is real.
Wow.
It was absolutely, and everybody in the ring stopped and turned and like, oh my word. But Johnny just killed Burhead. So it was phenomenal. It was so much fun.
Wow. Once in a
the
lifetime.
guys that were there, that are still around, and in particular, of course, Mike and I, when we talk, that always ends up in the conversation somehow. Because we had so much fun doing that, and I've gone back through all my stuff, and I've got just pictures and pictures and pictures of everything that happened. Well, I mean, only a smidgen of what happened is in the book, but the book gives you a great analogy of what really took place. But the memories, man, that were made that night. I mean, later on in life, there was a guy that was there at that show. His name is Bill Murdoch, and Bill was an AAU wrestler guy, and he was really enthralled with Tim Woods and all the wrestler guys, that were there. And so he came and he helped us do a lot of different stuff. And then Bill and I got to be friends, and he was doing this celebrity golf tournament deal up in North Carolina. And so we would go up there every year, and Abe and Rene Goulet and all those, Ronnie Garvin and George Scott, all those guys would be up there, and they were all part of this deal. And so it was always like a reunion for years. It was great.
Wow. So you did something dangerous, I think. You handed the microphone to Burhead.
We did.
Tell me how the interview, I think there's a picture of Ole Anderson and Burhead. Tell us how that worked out.
Well, Ole claims, and Burhead didn't dispute it, that Ole was part of how he got his name. And because they actually used to, when he first started, of course, he was down in Alabama and all down through there. He was Jimmy Jones, was how he started. Jimmy Jones. And then when he got into Georgia, they called him Cuckleburhead Jones. After the little sheep, birth things that would get in when you were working out in fields and stuff. And they just lowered that to Burhead, and he kept it. But of course, Ole and Burhead had a long history together, because Ole booked, and Burhead he put a lot of guys over and stuff. But now, of course, down in Alabama stuff, Burhead was over for a while, and he did some stuff in Continental later on. And Burhead, he's got it's all written down. I've got his memoirs that he gave me, and he claims to have a victory over a very young Sterling Golden, who went on to, of course, be Hulk Hogan. And and he very well may have, because he was over in Alabama and all down that way. But Burhead told some phenomenal stories. But when he and Ole got together on that microphone, of course, Ole went into being Ole. He's like, "What do you want?" and then, but of course, Burhead finally got to him, and he was like, "Burhead," he said, "you wasn't right 20 years ago, and you're still not right now." But they really had such a great time. And then, of course, he went around and talked to Sandy Scott and just everybody. And he was just such a character. I mean, again, like we've talked about in this whole entire time together, Burhead was never ever be Melvin Nelson again. And never. He was going to be Burhead Jones.
That's right.
Until he was not here. And that was just, I mean, that was like Ole. Ole would never be Al Rogowski again, ever. He was always going to be Ole. And so he was just such a unique presence that day, because everybody loved him. And and of course, he goes way back. I mean, he went back into 60s, early 70s as well. And of course, a lot of people associated him in the Mid-Atlantic time with Rufus and Blackjack, and there was a famous angle there which was just phenomenal. It is the holy grail of tapes for a Mid-Atlantic fan from that era, because we can't find it. Everybody wants to see that. But so somebody somewhere out there, a lot of us thought maybe Cornette had it, but he says he don't. But it was just, of course, sadly they erased a lot of those things, or just taped over, but it was such a phenomenal time. But yeah, Burhead was, he was my buddy. I love that guy. He was awesome.
Yeah. I was at WRAL in Raleigh, and I asked him, I said, "You don't happen to have any wrestling tapes? I know you used to do production here." He said, "Yeah, we threw all of those away."
I know. man.
And that's the same story
Yeah.
everywhere I went. I
Yep.
was there. There
The
used to be
very the very few, at least that are known about, that were salvaged, was Jim Cornette has them, and he put them together in some kind of compilation. Most of them are old 8mm arena tapes with no audio or anything like that. There's a few, little studio clips and stuff like that, but most of the stuff that's exists, Vince owns most of that now, but a lot of it's never been aired. I don't know what he's got from 79, 80, 81. Most of the stuff you see now is like from 82, 83 and up. But I mean, you want to believe that it's out there. Maybe it's not, but which is a real shame because there was some real cool stuff back then.
the same story everywhere. I went to Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Was right there in the TV station. I said, I knew you used to do TV here, wrestling show here. You wouldn't have to have any tapes. He said, nope, we threw them all away.
Yeah.
I said, you realize what you threw away? He said, we do, and we don't talk about it here.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I think that, and they get calls. They say they get calls all the time asking to try to get
back then. I don't think anybody ever envisioned that 40 years later that this stuff would not only be valuable, not just monetarily, but for history purposes, that wrestling would have that kind of legacy to go back and see, some original, stuff of any of these guys that we're talking about, and some of the classic things that happened. Because, well, like the deal with Burrhead and Blackjack, how that came about is Burrhead had been brought in as Rufus Jones' cousin, which they didn't know each other, but obviously they weren't really cousins, but they did have some type of, they didn't know each other, and they had beat up Rufus and then broke his crown, and they had just really, Rufus was all, and so his cousin Burrhead was going to come and exact revenge on Blackjack Mulligan. Well, Blackjack was like 10 times bigger than Burrhead, because Burrhead was never a big guy to start with. And Blackjack just beat the tar out of him. And Rufus is doing commentary with Bob Caudle. And Rufus was not your great orator. I'll put it that way. Rufus was phenomenal. I mean, he was so funny, but he got all upset, and he said, Bob, what are they doing to my cousin? And Bob was so deadpan. He said, well, Rufus, I think they're trying to kill him. and Blackjack, Burrhead was down, and Blackjack come up off the top rope with that big knee right across his chest, and Burrhead sold that thing. He shook more than Jimmy Valiant. I'll put it that way. I mean, this rascal could sell, man. I mean,
yes,
and so they rolled him out. They took him to the back, and they had a zipped up on. You couldn't tell it at that time. They had a full body cast from the neck down. And they put that thing on Burrhead and rolled him out in front of the studio audience like he was on the way to the hospital. It was absolutely absolutely hilarious.
He didn't have the purse then, did he?
No,
okay.
No, he didn't have it.
I want to see this thing with this purse. I haven't got a chance to see that yet.
Yeah, but Burrhead.
So when Burrhead went around with the mic, did he ever get over to Moolah and Mae Young?
I cannot remember. I think he probably did, but those two would steal the show later on, though. They would have their time. I tell you, seriously, I have the master tape of that event.
Wow.
And I've never really done anything with it, and so I had somebody here recently tell me that they would fix that, or they would not edit it. They would convert it for me to digital and to DVD.
Yeah.
I want to give you a copy of that, man, when I get it.
Oh, that would be awesome. Let us know.
It's the whole show. It's the show. It's the dinner banquet. It's all the awards for everybody they got brought to the ring, and every speech that everybody get. I got the whole 9 yards, and I'll be glad for you to have one.
Oh, that would be awesome. I would love that. And not only I would love that, but everybody on here would love to see that as well. Sandy Scott. Just a huge star. Tell us about him.
One of the nicest guys that I ever met from the wrestling business. And again, he was who you met. I mean, there was no gimmick there. Sandy was just a neat guy. I mean, he really was. I just enjoyed meeting him. I remember the first time I ever met Sandy Scott, I was probably about 18 years old, 19 years old. I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was at the grocery store, the Bilo. and here comes Sandy Scott walking down the aisle. And of course, he was still on, on TV. As he would come out and, shoot some of the more the management type,
Yeah, he's
setting
the
up matches.
representative of the
Yeah,
National Wrestling
yeah,
Alliance.
that's it.
Yes.
Of course, he would set up all the stuff with Slaughter and Steamboat and all those different things like that. But I remember meeting him later and just being in awe. Man, this is Sandy Scott. Now again, nobody else might have ever cared at all, but for me, as such a longtime fan, it was so cool. And then later, to get to know him, and he was just such a nice man, and he had such a great time at that show, and really we wanted to do something unique. I personally at that time did not know that he and George really truly didn't get along in real life. They didn't like each other, which was sad. And because they were real half brothers in real life, and I had George booked. I had to, and I still have the ticket right now in my memorabilia because once it was kind of figured out that they were both going to be there, one basically wasn't going to show up if the other one was, which was really sad because the Scott brothers and County Hall were a big deal because they sold out what's Rip and Swede and several others, the Infernos and everyone was. They were a big deal. The Flying Scott brothers, and of course, they had a lot of stuff with Gene and Lars too. I mean, back in the day, and early stuff with Gene and Ole. But Sandy was a neat guy. Now George was too. I got to know George later on, independently, later at other events, and he was a nice man. In fact, his wife doesn't live too far from me. She lives over in Indian Rocks, not too far from where we live here in Florida. But yeah, Sandy was the real deal. Love Sandy.
Wow. Well, we could talk and go on for hours and hours and hours. I mean, this is great stuff. I want to show you again the book Reunion at County Hall.
Absolutely.
The night of the wrestling legend return to Charleston. Tell people how they can get the book.
All you got to do is go on Amazon. You can plug in the name from this book, or you can just put in my name. And I've written other books, but they're all ministry related because of course, life after wrestling and police work. I've been a pastor now for 21 years, but this event was pivotal in how that happened. And I'd like to tell that story one day of how that event led me to dinner with Ted DiBiase.
Wow.
And that's how I ended up doing what I do right now. So all of that was tied together. It's amazing how it works. But yeah, if you go on Amazon and just type in County Hall book or type in my name, Andy McDaniel, it'll come up. And there's a color version and a black and white version. I just wanted for the financial differences. I do not for the money, but I do encourage people to get the color version because it really stands out.
Sure.
But either one, and possibly, hopefully, maybe sometime this year, we're going to announce the video, and
that would be awesome.
And I don't know how soon I can get it put together, but for sure within the next little while, because it will soon be the 25th anniversary, and so in 2023, and so just a little over a year from now, it will be the 25th anniversary of that show, and I definitely will have the video available for that.
Well, right there on the front of the book, you can see the who's there. Diamond Lil, we didn't get the chance to talk about her.
Oh my word! Moolah and May, and again, I make sure this is family show. So I don't want. But Moolah and May, how they talked to that little gal. But it was what a fun group of ladies. And I got to know them. They would send me Christmas cards every year. And Moolah's thing she had every year called the Ladies International Wrestling Association. They had these annual conventions and stuff. And the year after this event, she voted me as the promoter of the year. And Moolah was a really neat lady. I know she gets a lot of bad press, but for me and to me, she was great. And her and May, they were fantastic. And we had such a good time. They called me or wrote me cards and stuff. And every time I would call her house, she never forgot who I was. And if Lil answered the phone, she said, "Give me the phone, midget." But it was great. It was great.
Hey, she was the boss. Nobody likes the boss.
That's exactly right. That's like Ole. Ole gets a lot of hard times. But you know what? Ole, like you said, Ole was the boss, and that's why people didn't like him. But Ole made money, and Ole made other people money, and so
that's right. It was tremendous, absolutely tremendous, and very influential on us.
Absolutely.
Because we
Oh,
grew
no
up.
doubt. No doubt.
We
Well,
grew up
he
with
and your
them.
dad had a great time together at this show, and you just saw their personal interaction was really, really cool. It really was.
They were a team for a very long time. No doubt about
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
Well, Andy, I want to thank you very
Thank
much.
you,
We
my
are
friend.
definitely going to get you back to have
Love to.
part 2 of this story
Love to.
because it's amazing, and this was an amazing night here. I
Yeah,
think
it
once in
was
a
fun.
lifetime, meant to happen. No doubt about
Absolutely.
it. God blessed.
Thank you,
this
my friend.
and we will see you on the next Pro Wrestling Inside and Out. Good night,
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you, buddy. Bye-bye.